How you doing today, guys? Welcome back to the channel. We've had a huge update for Etheria Restart just come out. I've got the patch notes right here. I'm a little bit late to the party, I think like 24 hours, and in YouTube, that's a long time, I know. But I am on the other side of the world from a lot of people, and time zones are a crazy thing. But yeah, let's jump right into it. Let's have a look at these patch notes. To be honest, the main thing I wanted to do today for you was give you a bit of a tier list to say how I think these patches have actually affected the characters. So for a little bit of context, actually, first of all, yesterday I posted on Twitter a tier list basically saying if I think the nerfs or buffs had made a big difference or a little difference. I can show you that. I've got that just open here. So you can see originally where I thought the big buffs were, where I thought people had been nerfed to dust, as I put it, and where I thought the changes didn't really affect the characters. And since then, I've had a little bit of change of heart. I put this into a new tier list, so we'll talk that through. But yeah, first of all, just looking over the patch notes themselves. There's obviously some other bits in here to do with, just bug fixes and stuff like that. But the most important part is, of course, the characters. So we'll jump on down to that. So first off, we have Chloris with an 80% damage buff on his skill 3, which is a big deal because if you don't know how Chloris works, he puts this Doom Toll onto the enemies. And after being hit 10 times, once Doom Toll has been placed on them, he will trigger his ultimate again. So that 80% is compounding quite massively. The main issue with Chloris, though, is that he's not really an early game or mid game character. He's late game. And also very specific. So whilst the buff is really good for him, he himself just isn't really that universal. Jumping over to the tier list, because of everything I just described, I think it's just a nice buff, but it's not game changing. Next up, we have Veronica. Now, Veronica, from what I've heard, has bounced back and forth with her buffs and nerfs. It looks like she's gone back to quite an original state, so maybe they didn't need to fuss around with all that. And I think it's for good reason. I think she was nerfed way too strongly before, and now she's back to having an 100% chance to spread buffs across all of her allies, making her an incredible sub-DPS/support. It is no understatement to say this changes Veronica completely, and that's why jumping over to the tier list, she's big and buff. I think we'll see a lot more people building Veronica, especially with the potential to have her on the same team as Jada, who also received a buff, but we'll get into that later. Next up, we have Mia, who kind of flew under the radar, but she was never a bad healer in the first place. They reduced her skill 2 cooldown from 5 to 4, which is a huge deal, because if you don't know, her skill 2 has Dispel and Turn Me to Knockback. And on top of that, they gave her a bit more healing in her skill 3 too. Continuing on from Veronica, I really do think this was a big buff for Mia, and a lot more people will consider building her for the likes of Terramaton and Aurora. Next up, we have Jada. Quite a simple one here, just a 10% damage buff on one of her skills. I don't think I really need to go into detail why more damage on a DPS is a good thing, but jumping over to the tier list, it's nothing crazy, but it's nice. Now, this was potentially the nerf we were all expecting, but also very shocked by. Tiamat was strong, especially in PvP, but I never really thought she was that insane. Especially when it came to autoing certain bosses like Aurora or Doki Doki, she just didn't do her skills in the right order, meaning she didn't always have the best survivability. And now, they've removed even more of her survivability. Basically, she no longer recovers 30% HP, she only recovers 10 when entering her ultimate form, and she also receives 1% less healing than her original buff supplied. I'll be honest, I'm a Tiamat hater. Have been from day one, and I'll stay that way, even though she's been nerfed to dust. Don't get me wrong, once your Tiamat's built up really beefy in the late game, she'll still be usable. But in my opinion, I'm not trying to pull for her, I'm not building her if I do. Rest in peace, Tiamat. Next up, we have Rahu. Now, I think this is quite a fun one because Rahu wasn't weak, but he was kind of flying under the radar. It really kind of feels like they've been buffing some of the DPS characters and nerfing some of the support characters. Well, support/tank/healer, whatever you want to call them. And I think that makes sense. I mean, if you watched just my last video, I was talking about how I don't think DPS are really that essential. But if the supports aren't doing as crazy things as they are, it's definitely going to be more important to build your DPS. But anyway, Rahu, long and short of it is, he stacks more defense, he does more damage. They've given him percentage increases in his skill 1 and both of his skill 3 passives, which is a big deal. I think we're going to see some big numbers out of Rahu after this, so I'd consider it a big buff. Next up, we have the healer, Ling Luo. This is the character where you'll get given for free after 7 days of completing certain tasks. And to be honest, she was already really strong. But the fact she now has a 75% chance to purify and give continuous healing on her skill 1 really does solidify her as the apex healer in my opinion. But if we're talking specifically about the difference that the buff made, it's just nice, though I would love to put her in big and buff. Next, in the characters that got nerfed, we have Rosa. I'm a little bit confused about this one because I just don't see how it's going to change her at all. Don't get me wrong, I think Rosa's really powerful, so she probably should have some sort of nerf, but I just don't see how this is going to affect her so much that it's going to make any difference. I mean, she no longer pushes people back 10%, she only pushes them back 8%. And she was only doing that 50% of the time anyway. A bit of a confusing nerf for me, so no reaction. Next up we have Born, very similar to what I said earlier about Rahu. He's another DPS that's received a big buff. I do think, however, they're not quite as insane as Rahu's buffs, and I think Born was already sitting just below Rahu in terms of damage anyway. But don't get me wrong, Born is still really strong and I know he's got some fans out there, so definitely build him if you do get him. But again, I don't think the buff's crazy. It's the kind of buff I go, ooh, nice. Next up we have Puppet Master Lilith, another DPS, a bit more damage. Honestly, it's 4%. It's not a big deal. She has a very niche design, which made it so she was never weak in the first place. She was just situational. And because of that, I've got no real reaction. Now this was a buff I never really saw coming, but I think definitely needed to happen, because I did not see anyone using Kloss, even though her kit is jam-packed. The long and short of it is, she'll no longer slowly decrease speed, she's now just going to smack on a speed decrease, plain and simple, on her skill 3. This makes a huge difference. She's now giving defense down and speed down. I'd now consider her to be rivaling the likes of Marvel, who we all know is overpowered already. With everything I've said, I think it's no surprise she's going in the big buff section. I will 100% consider building Kloss if I pull her. Next nerf we have is Freya. Now I find this one a little confusing because personally, I didn't think Freya was a necessary pull anyway, but I do wonder if late game the effect she had could have got really out of control with some future characters they're going to implement, or maybe even some of the current ones when they're fully built. I don't think this is a huge difference, but I do think it makes some difference. Because of that, I'd say Freya's nerf was light work. I was already 50-50 on whether to pull her. Now I'm 60-40. I don't think I will be, which feels like a strange thing to say for the first rate up banner. Next up we have Turandot, who got a nerf. This one feels a bit weird because she wasn't really being built by many people anyway. She is a character you can choose for free from a selector that they give you at the start of the game. However, generally I'd recommend picking Casio instead, but if you already pulled Casio, Turandot is a great alternative, particularly for Aurora. All in all, it's a very small nerf, so on the tier list, I've got no real reaction. Next up we have a character that I've never really put any thought into, to be honest. This is the Red Chiaki, and it's an interesting one to consider because she's now outputting some really good heals, and if you don't know, her unique effect, Origami Guardian, reduces damage taken for your team. So she is just a bare bones, great healer. She heals, she reduces damage. I do think these heals are a big deal for her. The issue is her kit just doesn't really have enough in it anyway. This is definitely a significant buff, but I think she needed a little bit more to make me go, wow. So instead of wow, she gets a nice. Next up we have Dina, and I love Dina, so when I saw she was getting nerfed, I got very worried. The long and short of it is on her skill 1, she no longer steals 25% turn meter, she steals 15%, and on her skill 3, she increases her allies' turn meter by 6% instead of 10%. To be honest, these two things weren't really what you were using Dina for anyway. Her core kit still remains, particularly her defense decrease, so thankfully, I've got no real reaction. Next up we have Kraken, and I've got to be honest, I'm happy about this one. Basically, on his skill 3, he has a 10% less chance to knock turn meter back, and he has 10% less chance to freeze. Given how the numbers work, you can still make Kraken's probabilities extremely high, so I think this was probably a good thing to do, otherwise he would just be a massive pain in PvP. And given that they just released Mio, I feel like they really needed to do something about Kraken, so there was actually a reason to pull for her. I do think you will notice this difference in Kraken though. 10% can be a big deal, so I'd consider it a light work. Next we have Sanya. Now, this is a nerf that I feel like was just a miscommunication. If you don't know, Sanya's healing was part of a passive. And generally as a player, I consider a passive just something that always triggers. However, apparently this wasn't supposed to be happening. Apparently when she was stunned, frozen, petrified, or slumbered, she shouldn't have been healing. This is a huge deal because she was still providing heals and she could even dispel the slumber, froze, whatever that she had on herself. And on top of that, they reduced the healing too. I genuinely think this nerf was just because they saw how much she was being used, not because she was actually that overpowered. I do think this makes a massive difference though, and I probably won't be building Sonya. In other words, she's been nerfed to dust. Now we have Marvel. Yep, I think we all saw this one coming, but thankfully, it's not that big of a deal actually. So they've lowered his chance to steal turn meter, as well as the amount of turn meter on his skill 1, which I think is a good idea because previously it was basically guaranteed, which is a little bit strong for a skill 1. And on his skill 3, he now pushes back turn meter 40% instead of 50%, not a huge deal, but kind of noticeable. And they increased the skill 3 cooldown from 4 to 5. This is a big deal, but Marvel's already one of the fastest characters in the game, and we also have shells that can reduce cooldowns. So I think all this nerf did was instead of him having a massive power spike, it's a lot more gradual. But the more you build Marvel, you can basically get him back to his original state, which was overpowered. All in all, I don't really have much reaction to Marvel's nerf. I'll definitely still build him. Next up we have Victor, who, I'm going to be honest, Victor flew under my radar. I saw some people using him, but I just didn't really get why. But apparently I can't read, because now looking back at his skills, I can 100% understand why. Previously, he could have over a 140% damage dealt buff. Now that's gone down to 90%. That is a massive difference. That is 50% less damage dealt. And on his skill 3, he can no longer stack shields. It's not a big deal, just gives him a little bit less survivability. The main nerf here was definitely the damage dealt, and you'll definitely notice it. I hesitate to say whether he's been nerfed to dust, but he's definitely had some light work done. Next up we have Dorothy. It doesn't matter. I have zero reaction to Dorothy. She's not that good, and the rework basically changed nothing. No reaction. And then we have kind of a shocking nerf. Researcher number 41, if you don't know, is an R unit. Not an SR, not an SSR. I will point out, the skill cooldown on her skill 3 is only 3 turns, so combined with the shell that reduces cooldowns, that would only be 2 turns, or even the shell that gives you a free ultimate. You can see this more as them reducing her ally turn meter push from 70% to 40%, which is definitely a big deal. I think in the worst case scenario, you could still build her, but realistically I think it would just be a waste of resources now. So she's been nerfed to dust. But there we have it, that is all the characters. Looking at this list is quite interesting. There are definitely some characters that have been nerfed that I never felt like needed it, but I'm glad there's also a lot of characters who have had buffs that I really do think needed it. And even more so, I'm just happy that Rosa, Dina, and Marvel are all sitting in the no reaction, because they're 3 of my favourite characters, and I'm happy with the way they were. But definitely consider what I've said here. I think those characters in the big and buff section really deserve more attention than they got in the previous betas, and the characters that got nerfed, well, speaks for itself. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll see you on launch day.